Tempers are brand new in Soulframe Preludes 15, and while we will eventually be able to customize tempers on our favorite weapons through legendary crafting, for now we have to make do with what we find. So in this video, I'll help you figure out which tempers are worth using and which weapons you should dismantle. First, let's cover some tempering basics. Tempers are perks on a weapon that enhance its performance. Dropped weapons have random tempers when you pick them up, and crafted weapons will roll random tempers when you claim them. Items purchased from Zenith and Founders weapons have predetermined tempers, but there's currently a bug that causes Founders weapons to re-roll their tempers when you refine them, so hold off on that until we see a hotfix. Some tempers can roll on any weapon, whereas others can only roll on certain grip types or only on weapons with a certain origin. The number of tempers each weapon gets depends on its craftwork tier. Stock weapons can have 0 to 1 tempers, military can have 1 to 3, officer can have 2 to 4, noble can have 3 to 5, sovereign can have 4 to 6, and legendary can have 5 to 8. When you refine a weapon, you will always add at least 2 random tempers up to the max for that tier, except when you refine from sovereign to legendary, which will always result in 8 tempers. Shiny tempers that have this shimmering border and a star next to their name are twice as strong as normal tempers and count as 2 tempers towards that weapon's total. So, if we're trying to figure out which of our dropped and crafted weapons we want to keep and which ones we want to dismantle, the first thing to think about is how many tempers it has. Refining low-tier weapons is pretty cheap, so if you get a stock or military drop with 1 or 2 tempers you like, it's worth refining up to officer just to see what you get. From there, however, things get more expensive pretty quickly, so you'll want to be more picky about what you refine. The more tempers a weapon has, the better, because it means less will be left up to chance when you refine up to legendary. And we will eventually be able to customize the tempers on legendary weapons, but I'm guessing there will be a hefty materials cost for doing so, which would mean the better the legendary you start with, the easier it will be to get what you want. So, what do you want? Let's look at what tempers do so you can figure out which ones are going to be the best for your playstyle. The most straightforward tempers are the ones that add damage to attacks. More damage is always better, so as long as a temper adds damage to an attack you actually use, it will be a good one to have. In this group we have Arcane Barrage and Full Force that add damage to heavy attacks, Venger that adds damage to riposts, Rejoinder that adds damage to dodge attacks, including Spectre Strikes, and From Above that adds damage to aerial attacks, meaning both floating shots and casts as well as slam attacks for melee weapons. All of these are very good tempers as long as you use the attack type that they buff. For example, I rarely use slam attacks, so From Above won't be very useful to me on melee weapons, but I'm constantly hopping around while I'm shooting, so it will be great for me on bows. Think about how you play and which attacks you use the most, and then prioritize those tempers. We can also put Hale and Hardy in the direct damage category, which increases your weapon damage when you're at full health. This is great for players that are good at avoiding damage with blocks and dodges, but it also goes very well with packs that give you an easy way to heal back to full health. Unencumbered can also go in this category since it does add weapon damage, but at the moment it's not very desirable. This has nothing to do with the temper itself, but rather with totems. Right now, your main weapon and sidearm totems are active at all times, and while Unencumbered can get you a respectable damage increase when you don't have a sidearm, it in no way makes up for a second full set of totems. I'm guessing that both sets of totems being active is a bug, and if that bug gets fixed, then Unencumbered will be a very good temper, but that could take a while since this bug has been around for a very long time. If you have an unencumbered weapon with otherwise good rolls, it's still worth holding on to, but as long as you can have 2 sets of totems, more totems will always be better. We can also add Sympathy Pang to our direct damage category. This deals a portion of your attack damage to nearby enemies and is quite good for clearing groups and taking care of adds, which are present in most boss fights, so this is a very useful temper. First Strike also belongs in this category, but in my opinion, it's not quite as useful as the others we've looked at so far. This gives you increased damage against foes with full health. You can find it on casted weapons, which for now just means rapiers, and a buff to your first attack only just isn't as helpful as other options for rapier combat. If you're going for a stealth rapier sneak attack build, then this would be a nice little boost, and it could definitely be good on future casted weapons like staves or bows. Bounding Swipe is another direct damage temper, but this is not one I'll be using. It increases the damage of your sprint attacks on melee weapons, meaning your first attack on an enemy when you sprint up to them, and that is just not very useful. I am not a fan of Soulframe sprint control, so perhaps I'm biased here. If you sprint a lot during combat and think this will have good uptime with your playstyle, go for it, but it is definitely not for me. Arcane Rebound is similarly underwhelming. It causes magic projectiles to do more damage to enemies when you deflect them, but that just doesn't happen very often. If you really love this mechanic, then it might suit you, but I'll be looking for other tempers on my magic weapons. Follow Up gives you a damage buff on consecutive attacks after a heavy attack, and so far I've only seen it on melee or magic weapons. This sounds good on paper, but just about everything will count as an interruption for those consecutive attacks, so ultimately it's just not worth using. Dual Cast is a fake-in temper that gives each attack a chance of sending a second projectile, which not only increases your damage but also increases the chance of anything that procs on hit, so it's especially good with Aftershock, which we'll talk about in a moment. Bypass probably belongs in the utility category, but because of how Soulframe's armor works, I'm going to sneak it in here because Bypass causes your first hit to strip enemy armor. Armor in Soulframe gives flat damage reduction, so for example, 5 physical armor will reduce 5 points from incoming physical damage. This means Bypass will effectively buff your damage output against the vast majority of enemies, since very few enemies have little or no armor, so this is a great temper. Unfortunately, the flat damage reduction system punishes anything that deals smaller amounts of damage in multiple instances rather than slow bursts of damage. Most tempers account for this by calculating damage based on the attack that procced it and then ignoring armor on the tick itself, but that won't help Rupture. Rupture increases the damage from splintered arrows, and if you're surprised to learn that splintering arrows deals damage, that's because it's usually not enough to get through enemy armor, and Rupture does nothing to change this. It is a dead temper on any bow that has it, and I cannot wait to take it off my Starling when we get the legendary crafting update. And yes, splintering arrows also deals stagger, but I have ignored stagger up to now for a reason. Several direct damage tempers increase both damage and stagger, but we still can't see stagger numbers in combat, so we don't know how much stagger or what the game's various stagger thresholds are. We know that dealing enough stagger will open an enemy to a finisher, but well, let's imagine that I had all the right tempers to arrow hail on a group of enemies and splinter those arrows to open them all to finishers. I would then need to run up to the enemies and perform the finishers, and I might be able to get through 1 or 2 of them before the vulnerable phase ends. In that time, I could just shoot them. And stagger tempers on other weapons don't do much better. Swooning Blow adds stagger to all attacks, Calp gives you a chance to double your stagger, and this visually bugged temper on casted weapons increases the stagger dealt by parries. None of these tempers are very useful on most weapons. You could maybe make an argument for a heavy weapon stagger build, especially when paired with Ode Tempest for the stagger buff from Astrosphere. This would also be an excellent use case for Galvanic Strike, which says it adds voltaic damage, but what it actually does is proc voltaic status in a small AoE, which deals some stagger and briefly causes enemies to take more stagger from all attacks. So, on a heavy weapon with a high stagger rating to start with, stagger tempers can actually be useful, but otherwise you'll probably want to skip them. Fortified is also stagger related, but this increases how much stagger you can take when you block. In P15, stagger and stability are much more useful as defensive mechanics than as offensive mechanics, so if you find that you block often in your gameplay, this is a great temper for you. But it should not roll on bows, and that is a hill I will die on. Next, we have our damage over time tempers. This category includes Aftershock on Feikin weapons, Afflicted Liturgy on Cassid weapons, Enkindled on Dendrit weapons, and Savagery on Mendicant weapons. All of these offer a nice damage boost, but Enkindled is by far the best because it will also temporarily strip armor. All of these dots will keep ticking if you swap weapons, and any hit can proc them, including Arrow Hail and Splinter. Although, because the dot damage is based on the hit that procced it, a dot procced by Splinter will only do 1 damage. But even so, all of the dot tempers are pretty good, and any weapon that can get enkindled will be better with it. Finally, let's look at utility tempers. The easiest win in this category is Swift Strike, which increases attack speed on melee weapons. This isn't strictly necessary on every melee weapon, but it won't be bad on any of them, since attacking faster will increase your DPS. There are some weapons I won't touch without a shiny swift strike, but this is entirely up to taste. Again, it's never a bad temper, but only you can decide when it's a required temper. Breakneck increases the charge rate for heavy attacks on melee weapons, so if you heavy often, this temper will be very good for you. Arcane Alacrity increases the charge rate for heavy casts on magic weapons, and magic weapons have a very high damage cap for fully charged heavy casts. Arcane Alacrity will help your heavy cast builds feel a lot more comfortable and increase their DPS. Quick Draw increases the charge rate for charged shots on bows, and I absolutely love this temper. Just like charged casts on magic weapons, charged shots on bows have a higher damage cap than basic shots, so if you enjoy charged shot builds like me, this temper is a must-have. Fleet Fling makes you throw melee weapons faster. Perfect throws do have a higher damage cap than other attacks, so if you like throwing builds, this is a great temper for you, but otherwise you can skip it. Heightened Parry increases your parry window, making that timing just a bit easier. If you struggle with parry timing, then this temper will be quite helpful, but otherwise you're better off with a damage or dot temper in its place. Sullying Force increases smite chance, and this is never a bad temper, but it's not as essential with our new totems that give us other ways to increase smite chance. It's still worth keeping though, at least until we see how totems get adjusted. It might end up being more important in the future. Slinger's Tempo gives a chance for Stagger to become knockdown, and this is actually pretty funny. Any source of Stagger can proc it, and it's a fine way to get CC from arrow hail in bow combat, or open enemies to ground finishers in melee combat. This is not a temper I'd go out of my way to add when we eventually get the ability to do so, since it's not as strong as just adding more damage, but it can be fun to play with if you happen to roll a weapon with it. Hunter's Relish increases the amount of life you get from health regain. This isn't bad and can help you survive in melee combat, but our new totems offer more efficient ways to top off health. It might still have a niche in Garen Rude heal heart builds, but otherwise this isn't a temper I would prioritize. Renewed Slayer is even less impressive as it procs a very weak heal over time. This temper could be good in theory, but it needs a hearty buff to the strength of the heal. Until then, skip it. Finally, we have the Fear Tempers, Unnerving Blow and Sinister Volley. This gives your weapon a chance to inflict fear on hits and throws respectively, but the chance is pretty small, and honestly, I'm not sure I would want the chance to be higher. It could make for a nice CC in ranged combat, but the last thing I want in melee combat is for enemies to run away so I have to chase them down. It's certainly entertaining and fits the mendicant vibe very well, but I don't think it's worth taking up a temper spot. And those are all the tempers available in Preludes 15. If you found this information helpful, please toss the video a like and subscribe for more Soulframe guides and tutorials. What is your favorite temper so far? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, happy hunting!